Without any help, Tinuke felt utterly isolated. There was no one to turn to, no one to ask for help, and no one to share her burden with. It was just her grandmother, and the constant fear of losing the only family she had left. That night, as Tinuke lay in bed, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Sharon. "Meet me tomorrow at this address, 12 p.m. sharp. You will find out what I do. Please don't be late." Tinuke sat on the edge of her grandmother's wooden chair, clutching her phone tightly. The small living room felt unusually quiet, with only the soft hum of the ceiling fan filling the space. She stared at the phone screen, waiting for a response that never came. She had called her parents 3 times in the past hour, asking them to pick her up. It was her parents' wedding anniversary, and Tinuke knew they had planned something special. But what started as excitement for the night alone at her grandmother's house soon turned into an odd feeling that she couldn't explain. She was restless, her thoughts racing as she glanced at the old clock on the wall. The hands ticked slower than usual, or so it seemed. Mama Abeni had tried to calm her. "They will come, Tinuke, just give them time," she said in a gentle, soothing voice, but Tinuke was stubborn. She didn't want to wait. "I don't want to sleep here tonight, Mama," she insisted, her voice trembling just a little. It wasn't that she didn't love her grandmother's house. She just felt uneasy. Something in her gut told her things weren't right. Her fingers hovered over the phone again. Should I call them one more time? Her heart pounded with a mix of impatience and anxiety. Finally, she dialed her mother's number again, pressing the phone to her ear. This time, it rang and rang, but no one picked up. She frowned, glancing at her grandmother, who was seated on the couch, knitting quietly. "They will come, my darling. Don't worry too much," Mama Abeni assured her, though there was a slight furrow in her brow. Tinuke tried to calm herself, pushing the bad feeling aside. Maybe they are just busy, or their phone had died earlier, she thought. But as the minutes stretched into hours, that uneasiness crept back in. She couldn't shake it. "Mama, something is wrong," Tinuke said again, her voice more urgent. Mama Abeni paused her knitting, looking at Tinuke with his soft but worried eyes. "Nothing is wrong, my dear. They would come," she said, her voice steady. But Tinuke's insistence had grown. "Please call them, Mama. I want to go home." She stood up from the chair, her hands balled into fists, fighting back the frustration she felt. Mama Abeni sighed, reaching for her own phone to try calling Tinuke's parents. There was no answer. It wasn't long after that Mama Abeni's phone rang, the sound piercing through the quiet of the room. Tinuke jumped at the noise, her heart leaping in her chest. Finally, she thought. But the look on her grandmother's face as she answered the call wasn't one of relief. Mama Abeni's hand trembled slightly as she brought the phone to her ear. "Hello?" Mama Abeni's voice was hesitant as she listened to whoever was on the other hand. Her expression changed. Tinuke watched as her grandmother's face drained of color, her usual calm replaced with a look of horror. Mama Abeni's hand went to her mouth, stifling a gasp. "What happened?" Tinuke asked, but her grandmother didn't respond. "Mama, what happened?" she asked again, her voice rising in fear. Mama Abeni looked at her, her eyes glassy, struggling to find the words. "Tinu, there's been an accident," Mama Abeni finally whispered. The words hung heavy in the air. The news of her parents' accident sent Tinuke into a spiral of grief that no one could seem to pull her out of, not even her grandmother. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months, but the pain never dulled. Tinuke's small world had been shattered, leaving her feeling lost and alone. It didn't help that she blamed herself. The guilt weighed heavy on her, and no matter how much her grandmother reassured her, she couldn't let it go. "Tinuke, you need to stop blaming yourself," Mama Abeni would say gently, her eyes full of concern. It wasn't your fault, but Tinuke couldn't shake the feeling that if she hadn't called them that day, they would still be alive. Despite the darkness that had consumed her, Mama Abeni knew that Tinuke needed a fresh start. so she decided to enroll her in a new school. It was a difficult decision, but it was the only way forward. A new environment, new faces, and hopefully new friends would help Tinuke heal. The first day at her new school was quiet. Tinuke barely said a word, keeping to herself as she adjusted to the unfamiliar surroundings. She walked through the hallways, her head down, hoping to remain invisible. Her classmates, sensing her sadness, kept their distance, everyone except Bella. Bella was the type of person who never gave up on people, no matter how hard they pushed her away. She noticed Tinuke's quiet demeanor right away, and instead of avoiding her like the others, Bella made it her mission to be her friend. On the first day, she sat next to Tinuke during lunch, not saying much but offering her presence. At first, Tinuke didn't respond. She was polite, nodding at Bella's attempts at conversations but never truly engaging. She was still too wrapped up in her grief to let anyone in, but Bella was patient. Day after day, she would sit with Tinuke, sometimes chatting about her own life, sometimes just sitting in silence. She never pressured Tinuke to talk. It was during one of those quiet lunches that Tinuke finally spoke. "Thank you for sitting with me," she said softly, barely lifting her eyes from the table. Bella smiled, knowing this was a step forward. "I like sitting with you," Bella replied casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. From that moment on, the world Tinuke had built around herself began to crack. Slowly but surely, she started opening up to Bella, sharing small bits of her life, her parents, her grandmother, her dreams. Bella listened with an understanding that went beyond their years, never prying, just being there for her new friend. Before long, the two girls became inseparable. Tinuke found herself looking forward to school, not because of the classes, but because of Bella. They spent their lunch breaks together, walking home together, and even visited each other's houses on weekends. Bella's presence became a comforting constant in Tinuke's life, something she hadn't realized she desperately needed. The bond they shared was deep. They talked about everything from their hopes for the future to their fears. Tinuke told Bella about her dream of becoming an accountant, a way to honor her father's memory as he had been one. Bella, on the other hand, had her heart set on becoming a lawyer. She wanted to help people, especially those who couldn't help themselves. As time passed, it became clear that nothing could come between them, or so they thought. Then came the end of the final year in secondary school. Exams were over, and the future looked bright. But one day, Bella arrived school with a somber expression. "We are moving to Canada," she told Tinuke quietly, her voice heavy with sadness. Tinuke's heart dropped. When? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Bella's family was leaving right after graduation, and there was no changing it. The day Bella left was one of the hardest days of Tinuke's life. They hugged tightly, promising each other that distance wouldn't change their friendship. "I'll call you every week, I promise," Bella said, her eyes red from crying. Tinuke nodded, tears streaming down her own face. "I'll miss you," she whispered, her voice breaking. And for a while, they did stay in touch. Weekly calls turned into monthly ones, but the connection never faded. Bella's life in Canada was different, but she made sure to include Tinuke in every detail, sharing stories of her new school, her new friends, and her adventures in a foreign land. But just as it seemed Tinuke was finally on the path to healing, life took another unexpected turn. Her grandmother, the one person who had held her together after her parents' death, fell seriously ill. It started gradually. Mama Abeni would get tired more often, and her usual lively demeanor began to fade. At first, Tinuke dismissed it as old age, but when Mama Abeni collapsed one evening, Tinuke knew something was terribly wrong. The doctor's diagnosis was devastating, a degenerative heart condition. It was a kind of illness that required constant treatment, regular hospital visits, and medications Tinuke could barely afford. The doctors explained that surgery might help, but even with that, there were no guarantees. Tinuke, now 20 and in her second year of university, watched helplessly as Mama Abeni's health declined. Tinuke did everything she could to save her. She spent all the money her parents had left behind, sold whatever she could, her jewelry, her clothes, even her phone. It was the only way to keep her grandmother alive. But the expenses were mounting, and no matter how hard she tried, Tinuke couldn't keep up. Tinuke's world had already been shaken once by the loss of her parents, but now it felt like history was repeating itself. Mama Abeni, the one person who had been her anchor through it all, was slipping away gradually. She tried to manage the situation. She didn't want to burden anyone with her problems, and she certainly didn't want to let her grandmother know how bad things were financially. Mama Abeni had done enough for her. This was her turn to take care of the woman who had taken her in when she had no one else. The money her parents had left wasn't much, but it was supposed to help her with school, with her future, but none of that mattered now. Mama Abeni's life was the priority. Every day, she would visit the hospital, sit by her grandmother's bedside, and hope for a miracle that never seemed to come. The mountain hospital bills were suffocating. Tinuke tried to keep up, but it felt like the more she paid, the more expenses they were. The cost of treatment, the doctor's appointments and medications, all of it was overwhelming. It wasn't long before she ran out of things to sell. Tinuke had even let go of her phone for a smaller one, her only link to Bella. She tried everything she could think of. She applied for loans, but without a steady income, no one was willing to give her the money she needed. She begged the hospital for more time to pay the bills, but they could only wait for so long before demanding payment. Every night, she lay awake, tears streaming down her face, wondering how she was going to save her grandmother. Each day was a struggle. Tinuke would wake up early, go to the hospital, and spend the entire day by her grandmother's side. Mama Abeni tried to stay strong for her, offering her usual words of encouragement, but Tinuke could see the toil of illness taking on her. She could see the fear in her grandmother's eyes, even though Mama Abeni would never admit it. Tinuke, don't worry about me, Mama Abeni would say in her weak but steady voice. God will take care of everything. But Tinuke wasn't sure she believed that anymore. She had prayed over and over for a way out of this nightmare, but nothing had changed. The doctor's updates were always the same. Mama Abeni needed more treatment, more care, more money, and Tinuke had none left to give. As the weeks went by, the situation became more desperate. Tinuke began to avoid her friends from school. She didn't want them to see her like this, to ask questions that she couldn't answer. She stopped going to class altogether, telling herself that her grandmother needed her more than her studies did. The truth was, she didn't know how to face anyone anymore. Without any help, Tinuke felt utterly isolated. There was no one to turn to, no one to ask for help, and no one to share her burden with. It was just her grandmother, and the constant fear of losing the only family she had left. One evening, as Tinuke sat on a hard chair in the hospital corridor, she clasped her hand tightly in her laps as she waited for the doctor. Every time she saw him, her heart sank a little more, knowing it was never good news. She stared at the wall, the sterile white tiles almost mocking her with their coldness. The door opened and Dr. Ojo walked in, his face serious with the same expression he wore every time they spoke. Tinuke stood up quickly, her heart pounding. "Miss Tinuke," he said, motioning for her to sit. "I'm afraid your grandmother's condition is worsening. We need to act fast." Tinuke swallowed hard. "I know, doctor. I've tried everything. I have sold everything I own. Can't you please just continue with her treatment? I'll definitely find a way to pay." Dr. Ojo shook his head firmly. "I am sorry, Tinuke, but the hospital's payments policy is very clear. Without payments, we can't proceed. And if we don't do the surgery soon," he hesitated before continuing, "your grandmother is getting weaker by the day. If we don't act now, we might just lose her forever." The words hit Tinuke like a blow to the chest. She had known it was bad, but hearing it spoken out loud made it unbearable. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she reached out, gripping the edge of the table for support. "Please, doctor," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, just help her. I'll pay you back, I promise." Dr. Ojo sighed. "I wish I could, but the surgery cost 1.5 million naira, and we can't start without at least half of that. I'm truly sorry." Tinuke felt like the walls were closing in on her. 1.5 million naira. She didn't even have a fraction of that. As the doctor walked away, she sank back onto her chair, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. The weight of her helplessness was crushing. She sat there lost in her thoughts when she heard the familiar voice. "Tinuke." She looked up quickly, trying to wipe her tears. It was Sharon, her old classmate. Sharon's gaze softened as she looked at her, noticing the strain on Tinuke's face. "Tinuke," Sharon called out again. "Is that really you? It's been ages." She walked over and sat down beside Tinuke. "Tinuke, what's going on? What are you doing here? You don't look okay." Concern etched across her face. Tinuke tried to compose herself, but the tears wouldn't stop. "It's my grandma. She's sick. She is really sick." Sharon frowned. "Do you want to talk about it? Maybe somewhere else." Tinuke nodded. "Okay." They walked outside of the hospital, the air outside cool against Tinuke's tear-streaked face. They headed towards Sharon's car, parked in the lot. Sharon unlocked the door and motioned for Tinuke to sit. Tinuke sat quietly, trying to gather her thoughts as Sharon started the engine, letting the car's warmth surround them. "So what's going on? Tell me everything," Sharon said gently, turning to face Tinuke. Tinuke took a deep breath and began explaining, her voice shaky. "My grandma needs surgery. It's a heart condition. I've sold everything I can, but it's not enough. The bill is 1.5 million naira, and I don't know what else to do. I have nothing left." Sharon listened quietly, nodding occasionally. When Tinuke finished, Sharon sighed deeply and stared at the steering wheel for a moment. "That's a lot of money," she said, her voice soft but firm, "but I understand what you're going through." Tinuke wiped her eyes again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to do anymore. Right now, I feel so helpless." Sharon was silent for a moment. Then she turned to Tinuke. "You know what? I'll help you. I'll give you the money." Tinuke's eyes widened, her heart pounding. "What?" "Sharon, I can't." "Don't worry about it," Sharon interrupted. "You're my friend. We've known each other for years. I can't just stand by and do nothing." Tears welled up in Tinuke's eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief. "Sharon, I don't know how to thank you." Sharon smiled warmly. "You don't need to thank me. Let's go back inside and sort it out." They walked back into the hospital, together with Tinuke, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. Sharon went straight to the billing office. Pulling out her phone, she spoke briefly to the cashier and then typed in the details. Tinuke stood beside her, still in disbelief that someone could be so kind. "There," Sharon said, turning to Tinuke, "it's done. The money has been transferred." Tinuke blinked, still stunned. "Sharon, I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Sharon shrugged. "Just make sure your grandma gets better. That's all the thanks I need." Tinuke sat by her grandmother's bedside, her heart still racing from the events of the last few days. The surgery had been a success, and Mama Abeni was finally out of danger. Tinuke watched as her grandmother slept, the steady rise and fall of her chest, reassuring her that for now, everything was okay. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Ojo stepped in, with a clipboard in hand, offering a small smile. "Tinuke, I just wanted to let you know that your grandmother's surgery went well. She will make a full recovery, but there is something we need to discuss." Tinuke's heart sank. She could sense that more trouble was coming. "What is it, doctor?" Dr. Ojo glanced at the sleeping figure of Mama Abeni before continuing. "While the surgery was a success, her condition is chronic. She will need ongoing treatments to maintain her health. Monthly treatments to be precise." "Monthly treatments?" Tinuke asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel the anxiety creeping back in. "Yes," the doctor said, nodding solemnly. "Each treatment will cost 100,000 naira. It's crucial that she doesn't miss any appointment. Without it, her condition could worsen, and we might not be able to intervene next time. Tinuke felt as if the weight of the world had dropped onto her shoulders again. She had barely managed to gather enough money for the surgery, thanks to Sharon's help. But now this, 100,000 naira every month, Tinuke repeated, trying to process the information. The number sounded enormous, impossible even. I know it's a lot, Dr. Ojo said, sympathy in his eyes, but her condition is stable now, and the treatment will ensure it stays that way. We will discharge her today, but I wanted to make sure you understand what comes next. Tinuke nodded slowly, her mind racing. How could she possibly find that kind of money every month? She looked at her grandmother's frail figure lying on her bed, a sense of helplessness overwhelming her. The relief she had felt after the surgery was short-lived, and now the burden of the monthly payments loomed over her like a dark cloud. "Thank you, doctor," Tinuke finally said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'll figure something out." Dr. Ojo gave her a small nod and left the room, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Tinuke sat there, staring at her grandmother, wondering how she would ever manage to pay for the treatment. Later that afternoon, as she helped her grandmother into a wheelchair for the discharge, Dr. Ojo gave her his small nod and left the room, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Tinuke sat there, staring at her grandmother, wondering how she would ever manage to pay for the treatment. Later that afternoon, as she helped her grandmother into a wheelchair for the discharge, her heart was heavy. Mama Benny was awake, her eyes soft and tired, but filled with love as she looked at Tinuke. "Thank you, my darling. You've done so much for me." Tinuke forced a smile, swallowing the lump in her throat. "It's nothing, Grandma. I'm just happy you are okay." They left the hospital and they got into the car. Tinuke's mind drifted back to the cost of treatment. Sharon had been generous with the surgery, but Tinuke couldn't keep relying on her. She needed to find another way. Tinuke and Mama Abeni arrived home after a long day at the hospital. As Tinuke helped her grandmother settle into bed, Mama Abeni looked up at her with a tired but grateful eyes. "Tinuke, my child, thank you again for everything," her grandmother said softly, her voice filled with emotions. "I don't know how you did it, but God bless you for finding that money for my surgery." Tinuke managed a smile, trying to push aside the nagging worries that had taken root in her mind. "It's Sharon, Grandma, my old school friend. She helped us pay." Mama Abeni's eyes widened with surprise. "Sharon? Ah, that's a good friend, Tinuke. Make sure you thank her for me, and one of these days, you must invite her over for dinner. I want to meet this wonderful girl who has done so much for us." "I will, Grandma," Tinuke said, nodding, but as she left the room and closed the door behind her, the weight of her situation pressed down harder than ever. That night, Tinuke lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling. The thoughts swelled in her mind, the thought of her grandmother, her future, and the question of how she was going to afford the 100,000 naira monthly. Her heart raced as she thought about the debt she had already accumulated. Loan sharks had started calling her, demanding their money. She could barely manage to survive, let alone keep up with her grandmother's medical bills. Tinuke wasn't ready to lose the only family member she had left. She had to find a way, somehow. The next morning, determined to find answer, Tinuke decided to visit Sharon. Tinuke arrived at Sharon's house and felt a familiar wave of awe wash over her. It was hard to ignore how beautiful Sharon's home was. Elegant, spacious, and unlike anything Tinuke had ever seen. Sharon welcomed her inside, and after some small talk, they settled on the plush couch in the living room. "You have such a beautiful house, Sharon," Tinuke said, still marveling at the place. "I don't know how to thank you for helping us. I wouldn't have been able to pay for the surgery without you." Sharon smiled, waving off the gratitude. "There is no need for all of that. You know I'll always help when I can." But Tinuke's curiosity was gnawing at her as she couldn't hold back any longer. "Sharon, how did you do it? I mean, I know your parents weren't rich, and you were a scholarship student. How did you afford all of this?" Sharon's smile didn't falter, but there was a glint in her eyes as she responded, "Well, you could say it's God's blessing." But Tinuke wasn't convinced. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing slightly. Even God said he blesses the work of our hands. What work are you doing, Sharon? What's bringing all of these blessings? Sharon laughed slightly, her voice casual. Ah, Tinuke, you're so persistent. I'll tell you, I promise, but definitely not today. She stood up, brushing off the seriousness of the conversation. For now, what can I offer you? Anything to eat or drink? Tinuke shook her head, not in the mood for refreshment. I'm not hungry, Sharon. I just need something to do. I can't keep up with my grandma's treatment, and I still have loans to pay off. I had to stop school because I can't focus with all this pressure. Please, I need something, anything to make money. Sharon's eyes softened as she saw the desperation in Tinuke's face. Okay, fine, she said after a moment of thought. I will tell you everything, but not today. Soon, I promise. Tinuke sighed, feeling both disappointed and relief at the same time. Sharon walked into the kitchen to get her something anyway, leaving Tinuke alone with her thoughts once again. She stayed a little longer, but the questions still lingered in her mind, unanswered. That night, as Tinuke lay in bed, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Sharon. Meet me tomorrow at this address, 12 p.m. sharp. You will find out what I do. Please don't be late. A mix of excitement and nervousness coursed through Tinuke. Finally, she was going to get answers. She didn't know what Sharon had in store for her, but she couldn't help feeling a little hopeful. The next day, Tinuke dressed in her best clothes, nothing fancy, but the best she had, and made her way to the address Sharon had sent her. She arrived early at the private lounge, an upscale place she had never been to before. It was a far cry from anything she was used to. With its posh decor and well-dressed patrons, Tinuke sat down, her heart racing as she waited for Sharon. Time ticked by slowly, but finally Sharon appeared at the door. Tinuke smiled, but her smile faded when she saw Sharon wasn't alone. She was accompanied by a well-groomed man, probably in his 50s, dressed in an expensive suit and walking with the confidence of someone used to getting what they wanted. Haba, Sharon, I've been waiting for you since, and you didn't tell me you were coming with your uncle. Tinuke joked, trying to lighten the mood. Sharon chuckled slightly, but there was something different about her laugh this time. First of all, that's not my uncle, she said with a knowing smile. And second, I'm sorry for the wait. Tinuke's curiosity piqued, but before she could ask for more, Sharon turned to her with a serious look. You wanted to know what I do, right? Well, this is it. I'm a high-class escort. That man over there is one of my regulars. This is how I afford my lifestyle, Tinuke. When everything else failed, this was what helped me. Tinuke's jaw dropped, her mind struggling to process the words. Escort? Prostitution? She couldn't believe what she was hearing. This wasn't the answer she had expected. Anger and disgust welled up inside her, and without saying another word, she stood up and stormed out of the lounge. Sharon called after her, but Tinuke didn't stop. She was furious at Sharon, furious at the situation, and most of all, furious at herself for ever thinking Sharon's life could have been something clean and respectable. For days, Tinuke stayed away from Sharon, but reality soon came crashing down. Her grandmother's monthly checkup was approaching, and she still didn't have the money. She had tried everything, calling in favors, borrowing from friends, but nothing worked. The weight of her grandmother's condition was too much for her to bear. Out of desperation, Tinuke swallowed her pride and went back to Sharon. This was the day everything changed. That was the day she entered a world she had never imagined. One fateful evening, Tinuke found herself sitting at an upscale restaurant, waiting for a client. The dim lighting, expensive decor, and the hum of soft music in the background made it feel like another world, one that Tinuke never thought she would be a part of in this way. She checked her phone again, making sure she wasn't late for the meeting, when she suddenly heard someone call her name. Tinuke. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. Slowly she turned, only to see Bella standing there. Wide-eyed in disbelief, Tinuke's breath caught in her throat. It has been years since she has seen Bella. Bella, Tinuke finally managed to say, her voice shaking slightly with surprise. I can't believe it's you, Bella said, smiling brightly. Tinuke felt a mix of emotions. Happiness to see her friend, but also panic. It's me, she said vaguely, trying to keep her composure. Before Bella could ask for more questions, Tinuke's phone buzzed. Her client had arrived. I'm so sorry, Bella, but I really have to go, she said, standing up abruptly. Here, take my number, let's catch up soon. Bella looked disappointed but nodded. We will, and I'll call you later. As Tinuke hurried off to her appointment, Bella watched her leave, a flicker of concern in her eyes. Meanwhile, on her way out of the restaurant, Tinuke, still flustered by the unexpected meeting, wasn't paying attention and bumped into someone at the entrance. Watch where you're going, she snapped, still rattled from seeing Bella. I'm so sorry, the man said, stepping back apologetically. But Tinuke didn't stop to listen. She rushed past him without a second glance. That night, as Tinuke lay in bed, her phone rang. It was Bella. Tinuke, it was so good to see you earlier. We need to catch up properly. Bella's cheerful voice came through the phone. I know, Bella, and I've missed you so much, Tinuke replied, her voice soft. They arranged to meet the following day, and Tinuke couldn't help but feel nervous. The next day, the two friends met at a cafe over cups of coffee. They reminisced about their old school days and discussed how they lost touch. Bella explained that she had returned to Nigeria a few months ago after her family's move to Canada. So what have you been up to? Still pursuing accounting? Bella asked. Tinuke's heart raced. She wasn't ready to share her reality, so she quickly deflected. I've been doing a lot of things, but enough about me. How was life in Canada? Bella, sensing Tinuke didn't want to talk about it, didn't press further. They continued chatting, but Tinuke couldn't shake the feeling of guilt that clung to her. As the days went by, Tinuke and Bella became close again, just like old times. Bella even visited Tinuke's home, spending time with her grandma, who was happy to meet her granddaughter's long-lost friend. Tinuke made sure to keep her real life hidden, going as far as to claim she was into Bitcoin trading when Bella asked again about her job. Bella seemed satisfied with the explanation, but Tinuke knew the lie wouldn't hold forever. One day, as Tinuke walked down from the street after running some errands, she bumped into someone again. Excuse me, the man said, and Tinuke looked up confused. It was the same man she had run into at the restaurant weeks ago. Oh, I'm sorry, Tinuke said, realizing it was him. I wasn't paying attention. He chuckled. It's okay. I was hoping to run into you again to apologize properly for the last time. You seemed very upset. Tinuke smiled awkwardly. Oh, it was nothing. They exchanged pleasantries, and the man introduced himself as George. Tinuke found herself surprisingly comfortable around him, and by the end of their conversation, they had exchanged contact details. Over the next few days, Tinuke and George kept in touch. They would text each other casually, and before long, they met up for coffee. There was something different about George. He was kind, charming, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know Tinuke. As the weeks passed, Tinuke found herself drawn to him. She hadn't allowed herself to feel this way about anyone else in a long time, but George made it easy. They started seeing each other regularly, and Tinuke realized she was falling for him. But as their relationship grew, so did Tinuke's fear. She knew she was living a lie, keeping her secret from both Bella and George. George believed she was just a regular girl, maybe a bit mysterious, but he didn't know about the client, the double life she led at night. Every time she looked at George, her heart ached with guilt. She wanted to tell him the truth, but she knew that if she did, she might lose him. And losing George after everything else she had already lost was something she couldn't bear. Tinuke's life had become a web of lies, and the more time passed, the more tangled it became. Bella and Tinuke had been spending more time together since rekindling their friendship, but recently, Bella noticed something different. Tinuke was often distracted, her phone constantly buzzing with messages that made her smile. It was clear that Tinuke was preoccupied, but Bella didn't know why. One afternoon, as they were sitting at Tinuke's place, chatting about old times, Or rather, Bella was chatting. Tinuke barely seemed to be paying attention. Her eyes glued to her phone, fingers typing away rapidly. Tinuke, are you even listening to me? Bella asked, slightly irritated. She watched her friend giggle softly, completely lost in her own world. Tinuke snapped out of her trance. And looked up with a shy smile. Oh, I'm sorry, Bella. It's just there's someone I've been talking to. Bella raised an eyebrow. Oh, who is the lucky guy? Tinuke blushed. His name is George. We met not too long ago at a coffee shop. He's really sweet, Bella. I've never felt this way about anyone before. Bella's curiosity piqued. George, huh? You've been smiling at your phone non-stop. You really like him, don't you? Bella teased lightly. Tinuke nodded, her face glowing. Yes, I do. He's different from everyone I've met. Well, I can't wait to meet this guy. Who is making you all giddy? Bella exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with excitement. She could see Tinuke blushing. Well, I'll let you get back to your secret romance, Bella teased, making Tinuke laugh. I have to go though, my brother is in town and I need to catch up with him. Brother? I didn't know you had a brother, Tinuke replied, her curiosity piqued. Well, I do, Bella said. You don't know about him because he never stayed with us. He's been living with my uncle in France for years. Wow, that's interesting. What's he like? Tinuke asked, eager to know more. I'll tell you all about him later, I promised. Bella winked. Anyway, I'll see you later. Okay then, see you later, Tinuke replied, waving goodbye as Bella headed out. As soon as Bella left, Tinuke returned to her phone, chatting and smiling at the messages she received. As weeks turned into months, Bella watched her friend falling deeper in love, but she couldn't help but notice more inconsistencies in Tinuke's life. Tinuke's vague explanation about her newfound wealth, her tendency to avoid personal questions, and her frequent disappearances at odd hours began to weigh heavily on Bella's mind. Something didn't sit right. Tinuke, her own childhood friend, had always been opened, but now she was a mystery. Bella couldn't ignore her suspicions any longer. She decided to follow Tinuke one evening. Bella made sure to keep a safe distance, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched Tinuke leave her house, dressed more elegantly than she had ever seen her. Tinuke got into a taxi, and Bella hailed one of her own, instructing the driver to follow. The taxi stopped in front of a high-end hotel. Bella's stomach dropped as she watched Tinuke enter. She waited outside for what felt like hours, battling her thoughts. Part of her wanted to turn around and leave, but another part of her needed to know the truth. Eventually, Tinuke emerged from the hotel, accompanied by a man, older, well-dressed, and clearly wealthy. Bella's breath caught in her throat. She watched as Tinuke smiled up at him, their interaction too close for comfort. The realization hit Bella like a truck. Tinuke was involved in something dangerous, something really shameful. She couldn't believe it. Her best friend, a prostitute? Furious, hot and overwhelmed, Bella left the scene without saying a word. She felt betrayed. Tinuke had been lying to her, living a life Bella never would have imagined. The next day, Bella stormed over to her brother's house, emotions boiling over. She couldn't bear to face Tinuke, and she needed to clear her mind of her friend's troubling secrets. Bella needed answers, and she was determined to get them. When Bella arrived at George's house, she rang the doorbell, expecting a quiet day catching up. But when the door swung open, she was hit with a shocking surprise. There stood Tinuke. Time seemed to freeze as both girls froze in shock. Bella's eyes widened quickly, and her heart raced as she quickly put the pieces together. George was her brother. Tinuke's George was her George. Tinuke, what are you doing here? Bella's voice trembled, confusion rapidly morphing into anger. Tinuke stammered, taken aback by Bella's first tone. Bella, I don't understand what's going on. Bella pushed past her friend, storming into the house. George, she called out, her voice quaking with urgency. George appeared from the living room. Brows furrowed in confusion. What's happening, Bella? Why are you shouting? He asked, glancing between the two women. Bella turned to Tinuke, fury flashing in her eyes. Have you told him? Does he know who you really are, Tinuke? Or you still playing your little games? Tinuke's heart raced, panic coursing through her. Bella, what are you talking about? George, "You need to know the truth," Bella exclaimed, her voice rising. "This woman standing in front of you, the one you think you love, she's not who you really think she is. Tinuke, she is a prostitute. She sells her body for money." Bella's voice dripped with disappointment and anger. "I followed you last night, Tinuke. I saw you. How could you even do this? How could you lie to me, to George, and to everyone around you?" The words hit Tinuke like a punch to the gut. She gasped, her hands trembling as she stared at Bella, disbelief written all over her face. George stood frozen, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief as he tried to grasp the enormity of Bella's revelation. "Wait, what?" he said, his voice thick with shock. "Tinuke, is this true?" Tinuke felt her heart drop. She had fought so hard to keep her life hidden from him. "I was desperate," she stammered, tears pricking at her eyes. "My grandmother's treatment, it's expensive. I didn't know what else to do. I turned to Sharon and she introduced me to..." "Prostitution," Bella interrupted, her voice laced with contempt. "You were selling yourself, Tinuke, and lying to all of us about it." Tinuke's tears spilled over and she felt her heart shatter. "I didn't want to, Bella. You have to understand I had no other way to get the money. I'm trying to save my grandmother. I didn't want this life." George stepped back, processing the weight of what he had just heard. "So everything you told me, it was all a lie?" His voice cracked slightly and Tinuke's heart broke all over again. "It wasn't all a lie," she pleaded, desperate to hold on to him. "George, I love you and I never wanted to hurt you. I wanted to tell you the truth, but I was scared you would leave me." His expression hardened. "You were scared I would leave you? You were scared? You should have been honest from the beginning," he said, his voice cold. "I thought I knew you, Tinuke. I thought we had something real." Tinuke took a step forward, tears streaming down her cheeks, but he moved away. "Please, George, I didn't want this. I was trapped. I didn't know how to get out. I can't do this," he said, shaking his head. "I can't be with someone who lied to me like this. Tinuke, I trusted you." Bella stood to the side, arms crossed, her anger still simmering. "She's been lying to everyone, George. We were all fooled." "Get out," George said quietly, his voice final as he looked at Tinuke. "Just get the hell out of my house." Tinuke felt as if the ground had collapsed beneath her. She was losing everything. The man she loved, the friendship she cherished. She turned to leave, feeling hollow and defeated. As the door closed behind her, the weight of her choices pressed heavily on her shoulders. Alone again, truly, utterly alone. Tinuke returned home and found her grandma sitting in the living room, reading a book. Without saying a word, she walked over and hugged her tightly. "My baby," Mama said softly. Her voice grew concerned when she felt Tinuke trembling. "Are you crying?" She gently tried to pull Tinuke away to see her face, but Tinuke only clung to her more tightly. "Tinuke, what's wrong? Why are you crying?" Mama asked again, her worry deepening. Tinuke couldn't speak at first. The words were stuck in her throat as tears streamed down her face. After a few moments, she loosened her grip, wiped her tears, and whispered, "I am so sorry, Mama." "Sorry? Sorry for what?" Mama asked, now puzzled and more worried. "Mama, I've made some bad choices. Choices I'm not proud of," Tinuke confessed, her voice shaking. "And now it's all coming back to haunt me." "Tinuke, you still haven't told me what happened," Mama pressed gently, her eyes full of concern. Taking a deep breath, Tinuke began to tell her everything. She explained how she had been paying for Mama's medical treatment, how she had gotten involved in a lifestyle she regretted, how she met George, and how Bella had discovered the truth, ruining both her relationship with George and her friendship with Bella. By the time she finished, her voice was barely above a whisper. Mama sat in stunned silence, guilt washing over her. "Oh, my Tinuke," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is my fault. My illness pushed you into this. I'm so sorry." "No, Mama," Tinuke said, shaking her head. "Don't say that. It wasn't your fault. I made those choices. I didn't know what else to do." Mama pulled Tinuke closer, holding her tightly as she whispered, "My darling, you've carried so much on your shoulders. I wish you had told me." The two of them sat in silence for a while, just holding on to each other. As the world outside seemed to fade away, Tinuke wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew that with her grandmother by her side, she had the chance to face whatever came next. Days passed, but the ache of her loss lingered like a shadow. Tinuke wandered through life in a haze, struggling to find her footing. The vibrant colors of her world had dulled, replaced by a constant sense of despair. She missed George's warmth and his laughter and the way he looked at her, but the reality of her situation weighed on her. She could never go back to him. Bella hadn't reached out since that day, and Tinuke knew she had lost her best friend too. The thought of facing Bella again, of having to explain herself and her choices, filled her with dread. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart raced, hoping it would be George or Bella, but each time she was met with silence. One evening, as she sat in a dimly lit room, Tinuke picked up her phone and stared at the screen. She wanted to reach out, to apologize, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she explain the desperate circumstances that led her down this path? She felt trapped, and her heart ached for the connection she had lost. A few days later, Tinuke sat on the edge of her bed, holding a small box in her hand. Inside were the business cards of people she never wanted to see again. With a deep sigh, she closed the box and pushed it aside. Today marked the beginning of a new chapter. Tinuke had made up her mind. She would leave her dangerous lifestyle behind. The risks she had taken for money, the lies she had told, the shame she felt, they were no longer worth the price. With the little savings she had left after her grandmother's treatment, Tinuke invested in starting a small business. It wasn't much, just a simple venture, selling handmade jewelries, but it was a honest work. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful. Tinuke spent her days crafting pieces by hand, stringing beads and weaving delicate bracelets, necklaces and earrings. She opened a small shop in a quiet part of town, away from the life she had once known. The work was slow at first, but each customer who walked in gave her a sense of pride. For the first time in months, she felt like she was doing something she could be proud of. Her grandmother supported her every step of the way, often sitting in the shop with her, helping with little tasks and offering words of encouragement. "Tinuke, my darling, you are doing well," Mama would say, smiling as she watched her granddaughter work. "I am so proud of you." Tinuke had to rebuild from the ground up, and though it was difficult, she felt lighter without the weight of her past dragging her down. She no longer had to hide or pretend. She was free to be herself, flaws and all. Still, the pain of losing George and Bella lingered. Tinuke had hoped, deep down, that one day they might forgive her, but she didn't hold her breath. She focused on her business, trying to rebuild her life, one small step at a time. Months passed and Tinuke's shop began to pick up business. Her jewelry was becoming popular, especially among young women looking for unique handmade pieces. Tinuke was beginning to feel proud of herself, proud of the work she had created, but no matter how well her business was doing, the emptiness of losing the two most important people in her life still lingered in the back of her mind. One afternoon, as Tinuke was arranging a new display in her shop, the door opened, signaling a customer. She looked up, ready to greet whoever it was, but her words caught in her throat when she saw George standing there. Her heart pounded in her chest. She hadn't seen him since the day Bella exposed her secret, and she had never expected to see him again. George stood in the doorway, looking almost the same as he always had, tall, composed and serious, but there was something different in his eyes now. They weren't cold with anger or betrayal anymore. Instead, there was curiosity. "George," Tinuke whispered, feeling her throat tighten. "What are you doing here?" He took a step inside, glancing around the small shop. "I heard about your new business," he said, his voice calm. "I wanted to see if it was true." Tinuke swallowed, her mind racing. She couldn't believe he was here, standing in front of her after all this time. "It's true," she said quietly. George nodded, looking around the shop once more before meeting her eyes. "I can see that." For a moment, there was silence between the both of them. Tinuke wasn't sure what to say. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her head, but now that it was happening, the words wouldn't come. Finally, she gathered the courage to speak. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "For everything, for the lies, for hurting you. I never wanted it to end like that." George looked at her for a moment. Tinuke couldn't read his expression. She wondered if he was still angry, still hurt by the betrayal. "You put me in a difficult place, Tinuke," he said finally. "I cared about you, but what you did, it was hard to forgive." "George, I know. I've thought about it every day. I've made so many mistakes and I lost everything because of it. I lost you. I lost Bella and it's all my fault." George took a step closer to her, his expression softening. "I can see that you've changed," he said, "and I'm glad, but things can't go back to how they were." Tinuke nodded, her heart sinking. She had known this moment would come, but it still hurt to hear the finality in his voice. "I understand," she said, wiping away a tear. "I don't expect anything from you, George. I just wanted to know that I am very sorry." For a moment, George was silent. Then he sighed and stepped forward. "I believe you, Tinuke," he said softly. "I believe that you're trying to make things right, and I appreciate that, but it's going to take time." Tinuke nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. As George left the shop, she felt a mixture of relief and sadness. She knew things between them would never still be the same, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had a second chance, and this time, she was determined not to waste it. Months passed after George's visit, and life began to take a steady rhythm for Tinuke. Her jewelry business was growing slowly but surely, and her grandmother's health had stabilized. Yet, despite the forward momentum, a part of her still felt unsettled, haunted by the unresolved tension with Bella. The friendship that once meant everything to her had been shattered, and the way things ended still weighed heavily on Tinuke's heart. One evening, just as she was locking up her shop for the night, Tinuke's phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen, her heart skipping a beat. It was Bella. Tinuke stared at the phone for a moment, unsure of what to do. She hadn't spoken to Bella since the day her secret was exposed. Was Bella calling to accuse her again? Or had something else happened? With shaking finger, Tinuke answered. "Hello," she said softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "Hi, Tinuke, it's been a while," Bella spoke. Tinuke swallowed hard, the sound of Bella's voice bringing back a flood of memories, both good and painful. "Yes, it has," she replied. Bella hesitated for a moment, as if gathering the courage to continue. "I've been thinking a lot lately about everything that happened," she said. "I didn't handle things the right way. I hurt you and I was angry, but I didn't have to expose you like that. I'm truly very sorry." Tinuke felt a lump form in her throat. She had been waiting for this moment, hoping for some kind of closure, but now that it was happening, she didn't know how to respond. I hurt you too," Tinuke said, her voice shaky. "I lied to you. I was living a double life, and I didn't trust you enough to tell you the truth. I'm very sorry." There was a long pause before Bella spoke again. "I guess we both made mistakes," she said quietly, "but I don't want to hold on to that anger anymore. I miss you, Tinuke." Tinuke's heart softened. The pain of losing Bella had been as deep as the pain of losing George. Hearing her friend's voice now, offering an olive branch, felt like a weight was being lifted off her shoulders. "Bella, I miss you too," she whispered. Though their friendship would never fully return to what it was once like, but they both knew that they could not live in the past anymore. They agreed to meet up, to talk face to face, to walk through the pain and start healing. The next weekend, they sat together at a small cafe, talking for hours about everything that had happened, the choices they regretted and the lessons they learned. There were no grand gestures of forgiveness, just an understanding that life had moved them both in new directions. But they made peace with the past, and that was enough. With the wounds of her past slowly healing, Tinuke began to embrace the possibilities of her future. Her business was steadily growing, with more and more customers coming in each week. She had even started expanding her product line, adding custom pieces that were in high demand. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a honest work, and it allowed her to support herself and her grandmother. Her grandmother, who had been the anchor in Tinuke's life, was doing better. The treatment had stabilized her health very well, and while she wasn't as strong as she once was, she was able to move around the house and help Tinuke in small ways. They shared quiet mornings together, eating snacks and talking about the future. For the first time in years, their lives felt calm and peaceful. But there was still George. Since their last conversation, Tinuke had kept her distance, giving him the space he needed. She didn't expect him to come back into her life, but a part of her still hoped. She knew she had hurt him deeply, and trust was something that wouldn't be easily rebuilt. Yet the thought of never seeing him again left a hollow ache in her chest. One evening, as she was closing up the shop, the door opened. Tinuke looked up, and her breath caught in her throat. It was George. He stood there, hands in his pockets, looking a little unsure of himself. "Hey," he said quietly. Tinuke's heart raced. "Hey," she replied, settling down the jewelry she had been packing away. George stepped inside. "Business looks like it's doing well," he said, nodding towards the shelves lined with handmade pieces. "It's getting there," Tinuke said. "It's been a lot of work, but I'm really grateful." George nodded and fell silent for a moment. "I've been thinking about us," he finally said, "about everything that had happened." Tinuke felt her chest tighten. I know, George. I know I hurt you," she said quietly. "And I don't expect things to go back to how they were, but I just want to know that I've changed, and I'm trying to build this new life of mine." They stood there in silence for a moment, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. "I'm not saying everything is fixed," George continued, "but maybe we can start all over, slowly, and see where things go." Tinuke's heart swelled with hope. She hadn't expected this. "I would like that," she whispered. They shared a small, tentative smile, but it wasn't a promise of a perfect future. But it was a chance to rebuild, to try again. For Tinuke, that was more than she could have asked for. As George left the shop that evening, Tinuke stood by the door, watching him disappear into the distance. For the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. It was hope. Her life was far from perfect, and there were still many challenges ahead. But Tinuke knew she was stronger now. She had lost so much, but through the trials and pains, she had gained something far more valuable. It was her strength, her voice, her words, her resilience, and the chance for a new beginning. The moral lesson of this story is that everyone faces difficult choices, but the consequences of those choices must be faced. Tinuke made decisions out of desperation, but hiding the truth only brought her more pain. The story teaches that honesty and taking responsibilities are key to moving forward. It also shows that forgiveness is powerful. Both giving and receiving it can lead to healing. In the end, redemption is possible, but it requires courage, honesty, and the willingness to change. Thank you so much for watching this fantastic story on African Stories by Tiana. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more amazing stories. See you next time.